You're going to learn how to speak like a CEO and command more presence when you're speaking in a corporate environment. Today's guest is Chris Williams. Chris used to work directly with Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer at the height of the dot-com boom, working at Microsoft, and since then he's been a leadership advisor, and he dropped some golden nuggets around communication, presentations, and public speaking that you're going to love. Enjoy. A quick introduction of Chris. He has been in the industry for more than 40 years. He knows everything when it comes to organizational presentations, boardrooms. He's worked with Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer, if I'm not mistaken. He's seen everything you can expect. Not only that, but he's led teams of up to 1,000 people. He also has a TikTok of 200,000 plus. But the thing that I'm most jealous of is that his video background is much better than mine. You can see the little CLOL logo here. So I'm working on mine, but I think that's his greatest accomplishment of all the other ones. So Chris, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time, my friend.
Thank you very much for having me, Yasira. You're a god, and you know you've got 1 million followers on TikTok, so I'm just a piker behind you.
You'll have 25 more after today, I'm sure.
We'll see.
Today, Chris, one of the reasons I brought you in was because a lot of the members we have in the Speaking Academy Pro, they're working in some sort of corporate setting, and they want to learn public speaking and speaking skills. But in the setting of corporate, there are some nuances that are different. People aren't really stepping on stages as much, right? So in your experience, my first question will be, what effect does it have on people to learn speaking skills, especially in a corporate setting?
It's fascinating. You should bring this up. I do executive coaching, and yesterday I was having a session with a CEO of a Vancouver company that is I don't know, $60 million a year company out of Vancouver, and he has said, I have come to the realization that there is no more important job for me as a CEO than to communicate well and effectively. It's the number one most important thing that he considers is important for him is the communication, is the ability to tell his people what the vision for the company is, where we're headed, where we're going, how to communicate that most effectively. So no matter what position you are in the organization, your ability to be able to communicate your ideas and your thoughts clearly and effectively and get people to remember them going forward is probably the most important executive skill as you go up. There's a lot of other things. You've got to obviously be good at managing negotiations and some other pieces, but you can't get through most of those things unless you can communicate effectively.
So when you talk about communication, what are some obvious blind spots that you see in people and their communication skills in corporate?
One of the biggest ones is one that I suffer from, which is talking too much, right? Is feeling a need to fill every gap, fill every hole. Some of the smartest and most effective speakers you will ever see are people who know how to effectively use the pause in their conversation, to think carefully before they answer, to be able to talk in a way that sounds definitive and authoritative and slow and careful and thoughtful. And it's a problem I've got because I'm so excited that I want to get everything out and I want to tell you everything you never wanted to know about my mother and whatever. And it's something that I have to work on incredibly carefully and thoughtfully. When I do my videos, for example, there's a tendency to want to just get right through the information and get through it as fast as you possibly can, and you just want to get it out there because you've only got 60 seconds and it's a TikTok, but you have to remember that the pacing is an incredibly important part of the whole thing.
You've outlined a number of things there. One of the big takeaways that I had from our initial conversation was you told me that it's not people who are trained in the organization on communication skills who move up. It's people who go out of their way to learn it who get promoted. Can you talk more about that?
I think there's clearly a benefit to understanding how your organization communicates, and you want to be able to communicate in using the terminology and the style and the manner. If you got an organization that everybody talks really quickly, then you probably better learn how to figure out how to talk really quickly, right? But if you've got so matching your organization and being part of the style of the organization is important. But it is highly unlikely that you've got people in your organization who know how to teach people how to speak. how to communicate effectively. Most people learn communication through osmosis, by being in the room with somebody else who's been good at it before. But there's a whole slew of people who either don't learn that way or don't have the opportunity to be in those rooms enough to know what it feels like when you get to that room. So that's one of the reasons why you and I hit it off literally within seconds, because what you're doing is so important to help people grow in their career, to figure out how to do the communication before you get there. Because, you know, it's just, as I said, communication is perhaps the most important skill you're going to have, right?
And I imagine, especially with people like yourself who have so much experience talking to so many people, you're able to get a sense of someone's confidence pretty quickly in a presentation or a boardroom. Is that correct?
um, Probably within the first 8 or 10 seconds, you can figure out whether or not it's going well or not. And usually what you can do is you'll see somebody, and literally every human being on the planet is nervous, and I've helped Ballmer speak to, talk to through talking points with him, and he's panicked as he goes onto the stage, right? Everybody is. But within about 5 seconds, you see them switch into this mode of, I'm busy trying to communicate, and they can get out of their own skin and get into the thing. And so it is, you really can't, 30 seconds or a minute in, you can decide whether this is a train wreck about to happen or whether or not this is going to be something you want to pay attention to. And by the way, you do all these wonderful videos of, talking about people like Simon Sinek or whoever. You do these breakdowns of people, but one of the most important ones you did was that one that talked about Simon and his first 30 seconds, right? Because, I will guarantee you that Simon didn't think that through. Right? He didn't say, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to rub my hands and then I'm going to do this and then I'm going to do. He didn't do that, right? That wasn't what happened. But he has been doing it enough that he knows that this is sort of how I want to feel when I do that. And anyway, yes, the first few seconds, it's really easy to tell whether somebody is comfortable in their own skin. And by the way, you don't have to be comfortable talking. I've talked to audiences of 5,000, and you don't have to be comfortable in that, but you have to be comfortable in your material and what you're talking about in a way that spits it out to the people.
I know two of our members here who had this conversation. I have this conversation with every week. Rob, I'm looking at you here. So just to answer you ask you very plainly, are you saying even people at the executive level get nervous before presentation? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, dear God. That's one of the things I wanted to make sure. You had asked a question, in the text we were exchanging before about this. Not to name names, but the people I have managed to have one-on-one conversations with could fill a book, and people keep telling me, but I've had long conversations with Jack Welch and Warren Buffett and Steve Ballmer and Bill Gates and Michael Eisner and Martha Stewart and John Chambers and Albert, the list goes on. And I've been fortunate enough to have one-on-one conversations with these people. And every single one of those people is a human being with nervousness and fear about how people are accepting them and whether or not people are hearing what they're saying, and should I be doing this or should I be doing that? And all of these people, they are humans, and they get in front of an audience and things get scary. If I can, I'd love to tell you a tiny story. So Bill Gates used to do this thing that was called the CEO Summit, and he would have it at his house, and he would bring in the top 50 CEOs from a whole bunch of different companies. And I mean, it was Jack Welch and Warren Buffett and John Chambers, who's the CEO of Cisco, and Arthur Blank, the CEO of Home Depot, and Michael Eisner, the CEO of Disney. And it's a who's who of the Fortune 100 CEOs were at this meeting. And one evening there was a dinner, and I just, not to belabor the point too much, but I was fortunate enough to sit at a table with Jack Welch and Jack Welch, the chairman of GE, and Warren Buffett and me and a couple other people. And Jack was giving a little talk after dinner, to all these famous CEOs about what it was like to lead GE at the time he was leading GE. And Jack was preparing to give this. He was sitting through dinner like panicked about what he was going to say to this room full of CEOs and how he was going to do it. And one of the little known secrets is that Jack Welch has a terrible stutter, and it only comes out when he's nervous. And the first 2 or 3 minutes of his talk was Jack. He was absolutely petrified in talking to this room of essentially his peers, right? So yes, everybody gets nervous. Every single human being on the planet gets nervous.
You hear that, Rob? Yeah, write that down. There's no escaping the nerves. Really quick question for you, and then we'll get to the Q&As in the chat here. And by the way, if you haven't left your question, please leave it in the Zoom chat here. You mentioned earlier that in the first 10 to 30 seconds, you can tell right away. What gives it away that someone doesn't know their stuff or they're not confident?
Frequently it's eye contact, where you're looking, what you're doing. So for example, if you're looking at the floor, or if you're staring at your notes or the prompter or whatever, and you cannot afford the time in your, you have to have the confidence and time in your head to be able to look around, acknowledge that the audience exists. Very frequently it's eye contact. And I don't necessarily mean you have to look at me, but you got to be looking at, the audience or somebody or somewhere, and not just sort of like panicked and scared and looking at the floor, right? You have to make contact with people. We are human beings are an eye conscious, species. I mean, it's one of the reasons why, for example, I'm talking to you. I use a teleprompter on my Zoom screen so that I am looking directly at you through my Zoom, because it's eye contact is such an important part of the experience. And so my webcam is behind a teleprompter, so I'm looking directly at your eyes, right? It's just incredibly important.
That's one more thing I have to buy from Amazon now. Thanks, Chris. Okay. We'll get into some.
Yes, here, every single time you and I talk, you end up buying a better camera.
Last time I bought a $4,000 camera because of this guy here. I saw his video quality. He's like, you need to buy this one. I thought it'd be $800 or something, but
I'm sorry.
The video quality is Chris to blame here. Okay, we'll get into some questions here. The first question I have is from Sai. Sai says, "Hi, Chris. What are the ingredients of a powerful speech, in your opinion?"
The most important thing you have to remember is whatever the speech you're giving, the people in the speech, or the people will walk out of that room remembering 1, 2, maybe 3 things at the most, right? So the biggest problem I see with many beginning speakers is that they try and load the thing up with 7. Here's the top 10 things you should be thinking about. People are going to remember 2 or 3 of those at most. So pick 2 or 3. So the way I recommend people do it is you figure out what are the 2 or 3 things you want people to know when they walk out the door, and then design your speech around those. Put them in order. What are the most important, next important, third important? And then there's a bunch of discussion you can have around things like, do I do the big one first, or do I do the big one last, or what order do I do them in? But you've got to just get it down to just, I want you to leave with these, talking and thinking in your head about these 2 things, right? It's this and that. And that's the most important thing. The minute you start throwing junk, everything you can in a presentation, you lose it all because you've lost the point.
I like that you ended with the point yourself in that answer. One of the things that I have seen with terrible corporate presentations is that they have a lot of information just piled on into slides, but then when it ends, you just don't know what you're supposed to do with it. So when someone is preparing a presentation, should they have the point of the presentation first and then all the information that supports it, or they add all the information first and then they find a point?
I don't care how you get there. I mean, there are people who will do a PowerPoint presentation and they will basically make just, 74 slides of exactly what the point is. I don't care how you get there, but the point is your presentation should have 6 slides, right? Not 74, or I mean, I don't know if it's 6. Some of it depends. When I was doing presentations with the executives at Microsoft and we were preparing presentations, we had a 3 minutes per slide rule. So if you were going to give a talk for 30 minutes, that was 10 slides max, right? It was, and the other thing that's really important to remember is that human beings can only absorb a few words at a time. So our rule at Microsoft was always no more than, the ideal was no more than 5 words on a slide, and never 10 or more. And by the way, if you look at like Apple's presentations, they'll have 2, right? So you just want 1 or 2 words on a slide. It's so important to remember that you don't want people reading the slide. You want them listening to you, and the slide should just be saying, see, this guy is right. The guy knows what he's talking about, right? Anyway, I don't know. Did that answer your question?
That answered my question, and it reminded me of how many slides I've seen that are an entire paragraph, and the person just comes on to the meeting and reads them. Just send it to me in an email. Why do I have to listen to you read this out loud?
Yeah. If you ever find yourself reading the words on the slides, you're in trouble. And here's a trick that I use all the time. Yeah, I do it when I'm doing my videos as well, which is even though you would think it's powerful to say, let's say I want to talk about introductions. I don't know, whatever it is. And so I say introductions, right? You would think it would be powerful to have the slide say introductions on it. But no, what you really want it to do is say greetings or some other word, so that there's 2 ways for someone to appreciate what you're saying. You're saying something, this thing is making the word is making a different connection to the same topic. So I am a big fan of, unless it's like a trade name that you want people to remember, I'm a big fan of trying to attack a point from 2 dimensions, and you have the slide and you as the 2 different ways to reach to the same point.
Beautiful. I love that. I'm gonna change things up a little bit. I'm gonna read the question, or rather, I'm just gonna unmute the person who asked the question, and then I'll let them ask the question themselves, and you can answer, Chris. So, Eric, I'm seeing your question here. I'm just gonna unmute you. You can just read your question if you want, just so there's more personal engagement.
Hi, Chris. Nice to meet you.
Hi.
It's great to have having you here. Thank you, Yasir, for bringing. It's a lot of knowledge. So I wanted to know, how do you deal with tension and even hostility when you are in a corporate meeting, when you are presenting and have a lot of issues to deal with, and the people start to get really tense and quite a bit aggressive? So how do you deal with this?
The first thing to do is to slow it down. The first thing to do is to not get, the problem is when the tension in a room rises, what tends to happen is the back and forth gets really fast, really quickly, there's a couple of problems with that. One, the pace amps up the anxiety in the room, so that's part of the problem. The other part of the problem is you're likely to say stuff you didn't want to say, or not as carefully thought out as you wanted to say it, or that kind of thing. You also invite, if you immediately jump down somebody's throat, they're going to immediately jump down your throat, and it just will raise the tension. So one of the things I strongly recommend is if someone is pushing you or asking you or trying to get on you, to pause, think about carefully what your response is, and come back with a response. And you will lower the tension in the room almost immediately. You obviously can't sit there for a minute, but if you just take the time to think about what you're trying to say, you can ratchet the tension in the room down immeasurably right away.
I like that. The next question we have is Saida. Saida, are you here? Let's see. So,
Hi,
hey, Saida, can you read out your question, please?
Yeah. Hi, Chris. I have 2 questions for you. One is, Chris, excuse me, I'll just take a sip.
Why don't all of us join in on that bandwagon?
Seemed like a good hydration moment.
I'm extremely sorry. So, Chris, I have two questions for you. Given the pandemic situation and all, what are your thoughts on working from home versus going to office and meeting team members in person? So, what do you think of this situation? And my second quick question is, who is the best CEO of Microsoft?
Oh, second question first, as most people will often do. Satya has been amazing. And I've known Satya for a long time. I knew him back when he first got to Microsoft. He and I rose sort of up in the executive ranks, sort of parallel. He obviously went a little further than I did. But he, I really appreciate his combination of vision and understanding of people. Bill was amazing, and Bill's vision and clarity of purpose and direction was absolutely, it was electrifying. And I give him a lot of credit for what Microsoft ever became. But Satya, I just think he's absolutely perfect for the time and what he's doing, and his clarity of vision around where he wants to go with respect to the cloud systems and AI is amazing. Anyway, and now you're gonna have to help me. I forgot what the first question.
Remote work. What are your thoughts on?
Remote work. First of all, I do 99% of my work remote, so I'm a big fan. But I think that remote work is clearly here to stay. It's going to be everywhere. The biggest people who have problems with remote work are people who are control freak managers who don't understand how to manage people to objectives rather than to outputs rather than inputs. So they want to see your face and they want to see how many hours you worked, and they want to see instead of seeing the work that you got done. However, I will say, and by the way, you can make a great connection one-on-one with human beings over Zoom. You can do that just as effectively. Trust me, I know I've got lots of good friends, including Yasir, who I've never actually met in person, but consider to be a friend. You can make connections remotely over Zoom. It is incredibly helpful, however, to meet people face to face. I just got back yesterday from a board meeting I had in Houston, where I'm on the board of a startup, and we've been meeting remotely for a year and making really good progress. But there was really nothing quite like being together in a room and being able to, see them in the flesh and challenge them on different questions and that kind of stuff. So my ideal world is a world where you work remote, I don't know, 85 or 90% of the time, but there is always, whether it's once a month or once a quarter or whatever it is, an opportunity for people to get together and see each other in a room and deal with the current challenge or get creative together or whatever it is. There are some cases in which being together is just really important. And so that's one of the things sorry, I give long answers, but one of the things I encourage CEOs and leaders to do is don't treat work from home like a budget win, like you're going to save a whole lot of money, because you're going to have to schlep the people into some place to have these regular meetings together, and you're going to have to put them up in hotels, and you're going to have to feed them dinners, and you're going to have to pay their airline tickets or whatever it is to get everybody together. But yes, you can work, like essentially 100% remote, with the exception that you're going to want to get people together.
Beautiful. My biggest takeaway from that was just how you can form really strong connections, even if it's remote. And there's so many people that I know on social media now who are content creators I've never met, but we talk almost every day, including you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. So JC, I'm seeing you have two questions. I'll let you pick one just in the interest of time there. I'm going to unmute you and you can ask your question, please.
Oh, hi, Chris.
Hey.
Yeah, so I've sort of dealt with doing presentations to large groups of people and also to presentations to the board. I found both of them terrifying, which is why I'm on this course. Like properly terrifying. I managed to stumble through most of them, but it's never been a particularly edifying experience for anyone. But from your point of view, having seen the best people operate in both scenarios, what do you think the key skill differences are between them? So in a boardroom, there's a lot more interaction. There's searching questions. There's this proposal that you're proposing. How valid is it? Is it going to give me the money that I'm looking to achieve from it? Whereas in a presentation to an assembly of people, which is very passive, it's a completely different dynamic. It's very much you transmitting and them receiving. So what do you think the skill differences? And I'm thinking really more about the board side that people need to develop to be effective in that environment.
The most important skill to have when you're making a presentation in a small group or trying to present a proposal like that is the ability to listen actively to the question that you're being given, because frequently you will be busy trying to get your point through and not listening to what the question actually is on the other side of the table, or, and more importantly, reading the subtext of the question that's coming along. I think one of the problems many people have is that they get so sort of caught up in, wait a minute, I want to get back to my presentation so I'm just going to answer your question in some quick little way or whatever. And by the way, most high-level executives are onto that trick of and they will actively try and keep you off your presentation because they want to get their question answered. And if you let that get you flustered, you're in a world of hurt. So the thing you need to do is pay attention to the question you're being asked and really try and understand what are they really asking here, because frequently they will push back with sort of some little quick question that is, yeah, well, what about? And what that really underlies is that there's something underneath there that they're really trying to get at. And it would be helpful if you at least indicated an understanding of their question and what they really meant by it. That is exceptionally different. It is a rare person who can do, not rare, but it is a rare set of skills to be able to do the large scale, speak to 5,000 people, and then pull up a chair and sit down and do an effective Q&A with somebody. That's a really, really tough skill because it's two different things, right? They are very, very different. Does that get to what you were?
A second part of his question was also around the high pressure situation and how you manage that. So if you're in that situation and you feel the anxiety and tension, how do you manage that in yourself?
Well, every time this question comes up, I flash back to the time I was standing in front of the Microsoft board with a $10 billion proposal to raise everybody's salaries. And I had been preparing for it for the better part of a year. On the bus, I had needed one final bit of confirmation from Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer before I gave the presentation to the board. And we managed to get on a shuttle bus together to the meeting, and the three of us were sitting there, and Ballmer takes slide 16 and takes out a pen and changes slide 16 in my hands and says, no, we're going to talk about it like this. And I'm just absolutely freaking terrified about what we're going to do. So while I was waiting for I have 30 copies of the slides in my hand. And while I'm waiting for my turn, I'm flying through them, changing slide 16 on every single one of them so that they were all the same. And I'm absolutely panicked. And I walked into the room and I started my presentation, and I got to about slide 8, and Ballmer says, everybody agree? All in favor? Aye. And they approved it, and I never got to slide 16. And we had just made a $10 billion change in the cost structure of Microsoft. Anyway, how do I handle with the pressure? I think the one thing that was really important in that situation is I had gone to a ton of homework on every single member of the board, and had figured out who was going to be for me and who was going to be against me and what the situation was going in. So I was prepared for what was going to be the pushback. There's nothing that can substitute for preparation. Whether you're giving a big speech, you've got to have done it 30, 40 times before you give it. Whether you're giving a big presentation to the board, you need to figure out who's going to be around the table and who's likely to push back, who's likely to argue with you, what the points they're going to make, so that when you walk in that room, you have confidence that you'll be able to confront their objections. It's not that you will be magical, but that you will have confidence in that what you're talking about.
Just to piggyback on what he said, there's a great book called Never Split the Difference, which talks about a concept called objection auditing, which is you anticipate what the other person's going to say, you write down what you're going to say to them when that happens, and then you bring it up in the conversation. And I think that's part of preparation, knowing what they're going to say. It's been helpful for me in sales, and I'm sure it's going to be helpful in presentation. Go ahead.
And I will say that the most important lesson I learned with respect, it isn't quite so much, a board can be tough because of course you probably have limited access to the board, but you certainly can know some of their history and some of the things that they've done and the roles they've been in, and so where their likely objections are. But for example, I made it a policy of mine that I would never walk into any other meeting without having done complete homework. I knew the outcome before I walked in the room. Excuse me. So one of the things I would do is I would find out who I expected to be my biggest objector, and I would go and actually meet with them early before the meeting so that I could at least understand what their objections are. Maybe I have a chance to diffuse them. Maybe they beat me up. Who knows? But when I get into the room, I know exactly what's going on. It was my policy to never walk into a meeting when I didn't know what the outcome was, when I hadn't already planned the outcome. I never walked into a meeting blind. And so I knew that person over there, they're going to bring this up, and that person over there, they're going to bring that up. And again, it wasn't so much about fighting the fight in the room as it was giving me the confidence that I knew what was coming. So I wasn't blindsided by the questions.
And this goes back to anxiety around public speaking too. The more certainty you can add into a situation, the more confidence you have. Most people are not certain because they're simply not prepared. They just don't know.
And one of the things you and I have talked about in videos and other things is the reason for doing your presentation 30 or 40 times before you do it is not so that you've memorized the words. It's so that when it goes wrong, which it will, when you skip a slide, when something goes crazy, you have done it so many times that it's just obvious and natural how to pick it up and where to go, and you know the material, and you're going to just pick it up from where it went south. Because it's gonna go south. So if you've done it 30 or 40, and again, it's not that you've memorized it, it's not about the execution in the time, it's about the confidence it gives you to be able to recover when it does go south, because it's gonna go south.
Rarely have I been in an event where everything went according to plan.
Yeah, never, never. And by the way, this goes to a question that you asked earlier, which was, what do you do when somebody interrupts you all the time? Somebody, you know, I'm in an executive meeting and they won't let me get a word in edgewise and I'm being interrupted all the time. If you have complete confidence and knowledge and understanding of what you're trying to present, somebody interrupting you and directing you to slide 17 when you're on slide 3 doesn't faze you because you know the material on slide 17. And no, I don't recommend you go, let me show you slide 17, but you just go, you know the answer to slide 17 and you're not as flustered by the interruptions.
And with that, I also feel like most people vastly underestimate what practice is and how much is required. There's a big distinction I help people make is just preparing and practicing are two very different things. Just because you put the slides together before the meeting, that doesn't mean you're prepared. Well,
and you and I both have also talked about this, which is, you know, you can do your slides and you can go through them 147 times and edit every, you know, and slide them over and scooch them down and get this right and make it all perfect. And you can go through it and you can go through it 18 times and you can say it in your head and you can write your speaker notes and whatever. But until you speak it out loud to your cat or whatever, until you say it, you don't know how it's going to feel to say it and talk it out over. And you got to do that. And it's stupid and ridiculous and you feel like an idiot, but you do it and you do it and you do it until by the 4th or 5th time you're going, okay, I got this. And by the 18th time you're going, okay, this is just, you know, this is just so easy. I can do this in my sleep, right?
Yeah, fantastic advice. I love that. Okay, let's move along. Arslan, you have the next question. Arslan, are you here? I'll let you read up your question, please.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. My question is more about, you know, what is the best way to structure your keynote, especially for complex and dry technical topics? That's one. And that comes with, you know, another follow-up question. and that's around how does the keynote speakers remember all the talk of 1.5 hour, without looking at that slide deck or without reading any kind of speaker notes, just like the keynotes that I have seen most of the time from AWS or Azure or any else.
Well, we just talked about one of the ways, because they've been through it 134 times. And by the way, you have probably, Simon Sinek has given one of those talks 74 times before you've seen him, right? It is almost like, Jesus, I got to go out there and give this presentation again to him, right? It's because he's done it over and over and over again. So that's part of how you remember it. The other thing is, please remember that there will be a monitor that shows your slides below you. So whether or not it's got speaker notes or slides, there will be a monitor that shows the slides. And if you've done it enough, you will remember that the point I'm trying to make on this slide is this thing. And by the way, the best speeches are not telepromptered. They are bullet pointed, so that you get to that slide and the words are words that feel comfortable today for the mood in which you're in and the tone in which you've managed to build as you come to that slide. And yes, you're going to have keywords, and yes, you're going to have some phrases that you're going to want to insert there because they're the cool thing to insert there at that moment. But you don't necessarily want to read the speech in the exact order that it was originally written, because it sounds like you're reading. By the way, as somebody who speaks, my videos are all done with a teleprompter, and I cannot tell you how hard it is to do that. The skill and practice it takes to be able to read from a teleprompter is incredibly hard, and not everybody should build that set of skills. It's not necessary. Back to your original part of the question, which was, how do you build it? You go back to what I was talking about before. You come up with your 3 points. You have, the most important point you want to get across. If anybody leaves today, I want them to understand this one, the second one, and the third one. And I don't care if they're technically dry or not. They can be technically dry, and still there's 3 things I want you to leave this room with understanding. And it is how to do a procedure call with more than 17 variables. I don't really care what the technical topic is, right? But those are the 3 points you want to give. And then there are different ways to arrange those things. So what I suggest, for example, if you're giving a big, long keynote, you might do point 3, which is the least important of your 3 points, and then point 2, and then build up to point 1 and leave them with a kicker, right? The one thing you wanted them to remember. For other groups, you might do point 2 first, and then dive into the more boring point 3, and then come back with point 1 that's most important and finish with that. With executives, you can't get away with that stuff. They will not wait for point 3. They won't wait through them all. So with executives, you got to go 1 and 2 and 3 under the full consciousness that you may never get your butt to 2. Right? And if you're lucky, you can get to 3 before they interrupt you and stop you from doing it. But the point is, you have your 3 points and you try and figure out, for this audience, do I build up? Do I hit them a little and then come back? Or do I just go through them in order? And you have to decide on your audience what's the most important way to do that.
I love that answer. I want to reiterate something you mentioned about Simon Sinek, that he's given the same talk 74 times. If you look at stand-up comics, before you see their Netflix special, they've gone to these tiny, grubby clubs and tried every joke and polished the crap out of it. And by the time they show up on stage, they've said that same joke 150 times. And even if I'm giving my own example, when you see my clips on TikTok or Instagram of my workshops, I've done the same workshop more than 200 times. I know where people will laugh. I know where people will raise their hand. It becomes very second nature when you've done it so many times. So that was a really good point, Chris.
I want to point, I was fortunate enough to see George Carlin late in his career. And he was at it was at a show in Vegas, and he came out with a stool and a pile of note cards, and he said, I just want to tell you, I'm working through some stuff, and he basically workshopped his set in front of it. No, wait. And he flipped, no, that one doesn't. And he flipped this card to that card, and he went, you know what? That's what they do, man. It's how you get world class.
Yeah, but don't try that with your presentations with your executive. I'm trying out this slide deck. What do you think of slide 7? Oh, no. Okay, let me cut that one. So just do that in practice, okay? I don't want
Yeah,
anyone...
George Carlin had a room full of people paying $50 a head, and he still did that. But he had the advantage.
All right, Jane, I'll get to your question. I'll unmute you. Go ahead.
Hello. So my question is regarding emotional people at the workplace. I'm a very analytical person. I want to make decisions based on research, feedback, and so on. But I'm dealing with a lot of emotional people. Sometimes it's just connected to their personal, that they take things personally. But sometimes also like they're feeling excited about some new topic, and then they want to go for it without actually researching it before. So how do you deal with these kind of people during meetings?
Well, again, there is, and Yasir is nodding because I think he knows where I'm going on this. There is no better answer than to slow it down. The minute someone starts getting absolutely, in your face or pushing on you really hard, there's no better answer than to just sort of take the temperature of the room down. And there's no better way to do that than to not respond immediately or in panic to that person. You can't respond at their level. You have to respond at a much lower level, and you will drag them down into your I don't understand why you're doing this. And you can say, well, I'm doing it because what I'm trying to get to is the point that I'm worried you're missing, which is this piece over here. But you don't understand. This is really important. I get it. But what I'm trying to say is if we don't pay attention to this, we're going to miss the problem, right? And you'd be surprised. A conversation takes two people. And the only way it gets out of control is if both people get out of control. If one person is trying to be the pace setter in the room, you can take the panic out of a conversation. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. I don't get that problem too often, but I have heard from a lot of people who say, yeah, so you sound like a robot when we're discussing a personal problem. So I have to become more empathetic. That's a skill that I've learned. I have to learn as well.
Well, and there is, I mean, I feel a little bit like I sidestepped a little bit of her question. It is important to have some empathy and try to meet a person sort of part way to where they are. If someone is really emotionally, engaged in something, it is a little bit important to try and understand what's the deal here. Why is this? I'm not sure I understand why this is so important to you. Can you help me understand what it is? You don't necessarily have to agree with them or whatever, but at least reaching out and trying to understand what it is can help a lot to diffuse the "you don't understand what I'm talking about" kind of stuff.
Also, from my first year in corporate, please don't make my mistake. Don't tell people to relax when they're all amped up.
Yeah.
That never works. I'm speaking personal experience.
Well, it actually goes to almost all interpersonal relationships with respect to the workplace, which is you never want to tell people how to behave, and you never want to tell people how to react. You want to tell them what they're doing that is making you react in a certain way, right? You cannot control the actions of others. You can control your reaction to those other people. Never tell someone, "Hey, sweetie, calm down," right? You're going to just get a fist in the mouth.
And a letter from HR as well, I'm sure. All right, Munch, I'll let you ask your question, please. Go ahead.
Sure. Hi, Chris. I appreciate you. My question is around how can you enhance your ability to articulate and use professional terminology in your field? Like you may find yourself that you're knowledgeable and have the material and understand the material, but then struggle to convey it clearly to others. You're lost for words at times or lacking the right words or fluency to establish yourself as a subject matter expert in the topic that you're trying to convey. What's the best strategy to get better at that?
I think one of the key things you've got to do is remember that there are, in almost every discipline, there are maybe a handful, 8, 10, 12 key concepts that you really need to have complete command and control over. And I don't care whether it's programming and understanding object-oriented, inheritance, or whether it's HR and understanding the laws of the state of, New Jersey or whatever it is. There's some basic level concepts that you need to have. And I strongly recommend that you figure out what those are and figure out some fairly short, brief ways to describe those things in terms that are good for you. And what I mean is like 6, 8 words at most. So I can tell you that I know enough about object-oriented programming to know that inheritance and whatever are the most important aspects. And memorize those key phrases so that when you get confronted with some kind of a difficult situation, there is something that will automatically sort of knee-jerk pop out of your mouth that makes sense and is cogent, rather than trying to struggle for it every single time. Figure out what some of those key things, and this works in a presentation, for example. If you are in a presentation, make sure that there are a half a dozen different, important phrases that you've done in your presentation, so that when you get to the Q&A and one of them is going to be on that subject, you can bring that stuff back. It not only builds confidence in you because you have the phrasing memorized, the way to put it is already memorized in your heart, so you have confidence, but it also goes back to making your presentation better because you're echoing back to what you said. You're echoing back to what the point was. You're using the same terminology. So whatever your subject matter expertise is in, try and pay attention to the 6, 8, 10 things that are really important in your domain and memorize some key, whether it's phrases or ways of saying something or the buzzword that's currently in the mix, but memorize those things so that they will just sort of automatically come out of you when that topic comes up, and you don't have to struggle for how do I put this, and I don't understand how to put that.
Just say generative AI after everything and you'll sound
Exactly.
just keep saying that.
LLM, large language model. You pull that out of everything and you're going to be just fine.
Chris, I have a follow-up question on that. One of the most common questions we get in the community is around vocabulary, especially from people who have English as a second language. So there's a belief that better vocabulary makes you a better speaker. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
I am a victim of this. I love words. I am a word snob. I frequently get people who yell at me about my TikToks that I include words that are, in the 10th grade vocabulary test. And, what do you mean? And one of the, one of the things I have learned to do, and I did it for quite a while until I got better at it, was I would run my TikTok scripts through a program called Hemingway. It's an online tool that you can run things through, and it tells you what the grade level of your talk is, and it will first of all, it will fix obviously broken English. It's just Hemingway.com, I'm fairly certain, and it's both a web tool and an app. And but then the other thing it does is it tells you this is at a grade 6 level or a grade 5 level or whatever. And I always tried to make sure I was no greater than grade 8, and preferably shooting on TikTok for grade 5 or 4. YouTube, I go for 6 or 7, that kind of thing. But that helps a bunch. But one of the most powerful things to think about is if you listen to some of the really best speakers, you will realize that they rarely use big, complicated words, only because what it does is it gets the audience out of thinking about the point you're making and trying to remember what the hell that word means, right? So I don't think you need to have a big, complicated vocabulary to express big, complicated ideas. But I will admit, I am terrible at this. I have read a ton and I use a lot of big words, and I get I get called on it all the time.
So Chris,
But
you're
I don't
saying
think it's necessary.
you have the opposite challenge. So the question we usually get is, my words aren't complicated enough, whereas you're saying my words are too complicated. Have you ever seen someone who's had an inverse adverse effect on their career because they didn't know too many words?
The place where I found people struggle is if they particularly if they have English as a second language. And of course, you know, at Microsoft we had people from all around the world, and so we had a lot of people that was the case. The times in which they would struggle is if they could not even figure out a way to communicate what they're trying to say. I guess I would say I wouldn't worry about my fluency as long as you feel like you can get your point out. But if you get stuck and cannot get your point, and you just are so struggling to try and find the word, that's a problem. Because that's just a communication issue. I don't think you need to have a 10th grade vocabulary to be a senior executive. I think you need to be a fluent speaker so that you can talk as you need to talk, right?
Also, you'll be surprised, well, not you, Chris, but how often the F word gets dropped in an executive meeting.
Oh,
I'm pretty
Jesus
surprised.
Christ.
So not exactly the most articulate word in the dictionary.
Well, and you know, certainly that depends upon the culture, and there are some cultures that are more than others. But you know, if you were offended by bad words, if you are offended by bad words, you will probably really hate most of the boardrooms in the Fortune 500.
Well, there you go, folks. Depending on what kind of language you like, choose your job carefully. We'll get to the last few questions here. And Chris, are we tight on time? Do we need to?
We are not the least bit tight on time.
So we're here for the next 4 hours, folks. Just keep typing.
Dude, I know you well enough to know not to put anything immediately after this.
Okay,
I also knew this would be fun. So
is this fun so far? Give me a thumbs up, folks. Fun? Okay, beautiful, beautiful. We have Muhammad Jawad next. Jawad, go ahead. Ask your question, please.
Thank you, Yasser. Hi, Chris. So
Hey.
I'm required to do a lot of presentation. I personally struggle with the first 20 to 30 seconds of the presentation. As you mentioned, that you can spot if somebody's panicking or he's comfortable. So my question is, how do you effectively manage the anxiety during the initial 20 to 30 seconds of the presentation, or 1 minute of the presentation?
I go to a comfy space. So, and for it matters a lot for who you are and what your comfy space is. I immediately try, and this doesn't work for everyone. I try and get into a joke. And that's one of the reasons why people lead with a joke, is not so much for the audience as it is for them, because it gives them a feeling, they get a response from the audience, they get whatever. It also is a comfortable space for them. But there are other people, like I would argue that the point of Simon Sinek walking out the way he did and hiking up his pants and rubbing his hands was a comfortable place for him. It was making him feel comfortable. It was not anything about making the audience feel comfortable. It was about, okay, I remember how to do this and I'm good and I got it, right? So you need to figure out you need to focus almost entirely on you and what makes you comfortable and what will make you feel good and how this will work. And if that is, there are a lot of speakers, for example, who the first thing they do when they walk up to a dais is they rearrange the microphone, but that's about making them feel comfortable and making, it's not a, it is, yes, it's about being heard, but it's about making the space feel like it's their space, making them feel comfortable. So your first 20 seconds need to be all about you. I'm okay. I'm good in this space. I feel comfortable. Maybe lead with a joke, but do not look out and go, okay, how am I going to make you guys feel comfortable? Because you have no chance. There's 5,000 people out there. There's no way the only way you're going to make them feel comfortable is if you're comfortable.
Yeah. To piggyback on that, one of the people that I've consulted, Dr. Alan Goldberg, he helps Olympic level athletes on performance anxiety. So they've prepared for years, and right before they'll get nervous and they'll tank their performance. He says the single biggest component of your skill set shining on that day is your ability to relax right before. So if you're not relaxed, you're going to be stressed out and you won't be able to access your skill set. So think about what relaxes you in the moment. It could be music, it could be focusing on your breath, it could be focusing on yourself, and that takes experience, because for two different people it tends to be two different things.
Yeah, and that is why you see, for example, that's why you see so many athletes, for example, who wear a set of headphones with familiar music that makes them feel like they're okay, I'm in this place and I know where I am, and then I take it off and I can go out and do it right. That's one of them. There are all kinds of people who do an awful lot of breathing exercises. There are all kinds, but it is so important for you to remember that the most important person in that room at that moment is you, and you need to be comfortable, and you can do anything it takes for you to feel comfortable, because I know you want to make them feel like this is going to be great and wonderful and whatever. What's going to make it great and wonderful is you.
That sounded almost poetic, Chris. I like that.
Sorry, it's completely off the cuff. Geez, what does that mean?
Rico, I'll let you ask your question, please.
Hi, Chris. Great stuff. Really love that you're sharing these great tips. Also love the story on, Steve Ballmer switching up your slide 16 last minute. My question for you is, how do you tell great stories? Like, what are some tips or suggestions that you can give us, some practical things? Just because I understand, obviously, practicing is important, but I think storytelling is a little bit different than just delivering information that you're already an expert on. If you can share any insight there, that'd be great.
The key to a great story is to spend a little bit less time worrying about if it's a great story, and a little bit, I mean, if it rang, if it's stuck in your head because it was something that happened and it is stuck in your head, that thing happened in 1999. Okay, and I can vividly remember it today. And so one of the keys to a great story is that it is something that means and pokes again in on you, and something that is important and remembering or memorable to you. The other thing is to remember that the most important component of most storytelling is the emotional aspect of that story. So a terrible story is Joe went to here, he came to there, he then walked into this, he slugged the guy in the face, and he walked out the door, right? That's a story, true enough. But what you really want to know is why Joe was so sorry about. You really want to know is, why is Joe going into that room? What is important to Joe? Why is he emotional? He was nervous when he walked into that room. And any way you can get the emotion part of it involved, that's what makes a great story. And so, for example, when I was just telling you that story about working with Steve Ballmer, I related the fact that I was sitting there in that shuttle bus absolutely panicked because this jerkwad had just changed one of the slides I've been working on for a year within minutes before I had to give it, right? Everybody can relate to that. That was an emotional, right? And that's what made it a good story.
One thing that I learned early on was very similar to what you just said, Chris. Every good story is about emotional change. The characters or the places that you're talking about have to be in one place at the start and another place at the end. If it does not have that, it's not a story, it's a sequence of events, which is significantly less interesting.
And let's go back to the story I just told you. I was panicked when I walked in the door, but I ended it because Ballmer just got an approval for the thing before I even got to slide 16, right? That was a story, right?
Perfect. Hopefully that answers your question, Rico. Okay, next we have Amanpreet. Amanpreet, are you here? You are. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I'm here. My question is only that how could we start the notes, and how could we work on it?
How could you start notes?
Yeah, how could we start the notes on speaking? Like how can we express something, whatever we want to talk about? How can we express on it, and how can we make the note? How can we start it, and how can we end it, and what we can include in the center part? You understand what I'm saying?
And I would argue that every speech you're going to give, every presentation you're going to give is a story. And so we just told you in some senses how to do that, right? So what you want to do is you want to begin at a point where everybody can recognize where they are. We're here today to talk about whatever it is. You're going to take them through some arc of some kind. So we looked at doing this, we looked at doing that, we decided to do the other thing, and then whatever. And then we ended at this point, and here's what the moral of the story is. And if you build a presentation around that arc, as it were, that story arc, I'm going to take you from here, we're going to journey through the land of Oz, and we're going to end up in this point over here. And this is the point I want you to remember when you walk out the door. That's a great presentation, right? And so what you have to do is figure out, where is everybody now? Where do you want them to be? What is the journey to get them there? And what do you want to walk them through?
And by the way, folks, I think month after next week, I'm going to have a fellow named Doug Stevenson come and talk about storytelling. He consults companies like IBM and Google on storytelling in a business context. You learn a lot more there. And he's got a book called The Storytelling Theater, I believe. So you can look that up as well. Okay, we'll do one last question, Chris. The last question comes from Jatin. Jatin, do you want to share your question, please?
Sure. Firstly, thank you so much, Yasir, for arranging this. It's really a pleasure. And Chris, thank you so much for taking the time and meeting with us. I feel grateful just to even get an opportunity to ask you a question. So thank you for that. My question to you is, how do you deal with social anxiety? I feel that I hesitate quite a bit before I can initiate conversation with someone. Once I end up speaking with them, then it calms down. But that initial phase, that initial hesitation to start a conversation, do you have any tips that you could share with us?
Well, I want to give you a tried answer, which is the person on the other side of the thing has just as much anxiety as you do about the situation, but that doesn't help you. And I fully appreciate that. But I think it does help you to understand that when you're in a social situation, there isn't, although there are some sort of common themes that go around, there's no sort of right way or wrong way to approach a situation. So you really just have to dive into it. You have to figure out how I'm going to approach this person. When I go to talk to somebody, there's two things that are in my head. The first one is, what is the first sentence that's going to come out of my mouth that is something that will intrigue them in some way so that we can end up having a conversation. And the second thing is, what the heck is their name? 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 And I am absolutely terrible in social situations. I will go meet someone and they'll say, hi, my name is, Yasir. And at 30 seconds into it, I'll go, I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. It's so for me, that's my social anxiety, is I will forget who the heck you are. But I think what you have to do is you have to just go in it with this is the thing I want to talk about. And by the way, here's my trick to social interactions. Literally everyone prefers to talk about themselves. So if you go to somebody in a thing and you're having a social interaction of some kind, ask them not what they do, but what is the most important thing about what they do? Tell me about a little bit more about that. Ask them questions about them, who they are, what they're doing, what's interesting, what's challenging. Listen really carefully to what they say and build on what they say and let them do about 85% of the talking. This is one of the things I have to teach leaders all the time. If you're trying to impress somebody, let them do about 90% of the talking, 80% of the talking, because when that interaction is over, they will say, gosh, that Yasir, he's a smart dude. You don't have to talk to be thought of to be smart. You have to be a good listener and ask great questions.
To piggyback on what he just said, Jatin, I had social anxiety as well, and to some degree I still do. It's a lot easier to get someone else to talk than it is to come up with 50 things to talk about in the moment, because then you're not present anyway. One of the things that helps me is get the other person to tell you a story, because a story is it just has a lot more mass in a conversation. So instead of saying, what do you do? They're going to give you a one-word answer. I'm an accountant. What got you into accounting? That's going to be a much longer answer. And when they give you the story as a response, it gives you 50 other things in that story to then branch off.
Yep.
So,
and being a great listener is easily as important as being a great conversationalist, right?
Yeah, a good entry point, Jatin, in any conversation, if you want someone to keep talking, start your questions with what and how. How did you end up doing X? What got you into Y? And then the answer to that is going to be a story.
And if you, as Yasir said, the trick to that is listening carefully. Don't just act like you're sort of a reporter taking notes, but listen carefully to what they say and pick out one or two things there that are intriguing. Oh, really? You're from Montana? What? I've never been there. Tell me, is it really cold there as much as they say it is? Oh, well, when I was a kid growing up, we used to walk both ways uphill to school in the snow. And oh God, did it snow a lot? Well, yeah, it really isn't. Has climate change really affected how much it snows in Montana? Right? There's a million ways you can peel off of that thing. And by asking the question, you're getting them to do a lot of the legwork. And as I said, when you two part, if you've asked great questions, they will say, gosh, what a smart guy that guy was, right?
There have been times where I have a counseling background, so I'm pretty trained on listening and asking questions, where I would listen to people and just ask questions. There was a time I remember I was speaking to an executive and I got maybe 3 questions in an hour. And
Yeah.
he spoke for the entire hour. And then at the end, he said, well, this was a great conversation. Was it a conversation? I don't know. I was like, sure. So they felt heard and understood just because they got to talk and discuss topics with other people. So
Yeah.
the more you get people to talk, the better.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So with that, Chris, I know we're 8 minutes over, but thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. I want to go back to what you said about presentations. Leave everybody with 3 things. What should they do, think, or believe right now? So for people who want to get better at communication skills, go up in their career, become better speakers, what are the 3 things you can leave us with today?
Well, I'm going to actually just leave you with 2. And one of those, well,
Third one
actually,
without me
I'll give you,
interrupting you
no,
anyway.
I'll give you the 3rd one because you're going to push me for it. So I think one of the most important things is to remember that preparation in any situation is the most important element, whether you're speaking, whether or not you are going into a meeting that's trying to decide something. Preparation is the key to success in that kind of thing. When you're presenting to executives, remember that they are humans and that they are almost certainly sitting in that meeting trying to think about how does this affect me or my team or my organization. So they are probably self-centered around, at least from their organizational perspective. So when you go into that executive, you should be listening to every question they have and trying to figure out what they really mean by that question. It almost always means something themselves. And remember, every single human being that ever was is nervous before they have any kind of one of those presentations. Literally everybody is nervous. I swear to you, Taylor Swift is nervous before she goes out on that stage.
And they have more pressure because people have paid them. They expect big things out of them. They have a lot more pressure to perform in those situations too. Folks, did we enjoy this? Give me a quick thumbs up if you enjoyed this. Fantastic. So Chris, where can people find you after this call today?
DLWill.com.
If only there was a prompt somewhere on the screen that told them where to go.
You can find me there. You can also find me on TikTok or Threads or LinkedIn or YouTube. Just if you search for CL Will, CLWILL, on like any of those platforms, you're likely to find me. And that's a good way to hear way too much about me and of my opinions on subjects.
Someone also asked about remote work. You talk a lot about remote work on LinkedIn, so do check that out as well. Check out the articles.
If you just go to LinkedIn, it's the CL Will there, as well as it is on TikTok and Threads and everywhere.
Whatever the new thing is going to be in 2025.